Good morning. There I am, Steve Weber here. Welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show on Tuesday, February 2nd. It's Groundhog's Day. I'm going to assume the groundhog has not seen his shadow since I am in eastern Pennsylvania, and western Pennsylvania, where the groundhog lives, is not that far away, and it's rather cloud covered and snowy, and so I'm assuming he didn't see a shadow this morning, but haven't heard that officially. Anyway, February 2nd, show number 119. Have a couple of I have one exciting guest coming up. Angelia LaRue, Reverend Angelia LaRue, returns to the American Gumption Morning Show. She was here 2 weeks ago, and we started the conversation. So we'll continue that about 15 past the hour. Alrighty, so it's Tuesday, February 2nd, mentioned that already. Now, today was the day my grandmother, my father's mother, was born back in 1907. She lived to be 90 or 91 years old, and she had a good long life. But anyway, February 2nd was always a memorable day for me because it was both Groundhog's Day and Grandmom's birthday. So happy birthday to Grandmom up in heaven. All righty. So let's see what, and I got a monologue coming up. Awakening is what I'm going to talk about. It ties in with what Angie, her radical, spontaneous awakening of consciousness. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, my awakening and how it contrasts to what, she did. So we'll use that as a launching into some of the conversation that we have. So that'll be the monologue coming up. Alrighty. Now, tomorrow I have Nikki Roscoe joining us again. I think it's visit number 6. Nikki's been a regular guest since the beginning, and she comes about once a month. And this time, we have two topics we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about her TV days in the 90s when she was doing television on British television, but she also had a show that she did with an American woman who. Anyway, we'll get into all of that and we'll share that whole thing. So and she also has a brand new course called Love Yourself, Manifest Happiness, Abundance, and Romance. That will be Nikki tomorrow on the show. And then on Thursday, Malika Paranosek, and she is a composer and former performance artist, a composer and performance artist. She comes from, she was born and raised in Belgrade, Serbia, or at least in Serbia. I don't know, but she attended school in Belgrade. And then she came as a young woman, and she attended Juilliard School, the music school, and she is still a current faculty member there. So she's doing some nifty work with her nonprofit, and composing music and this performing art thing. So I'm excited to interview her on Thursday. All righty, now what's today, everybody? Is it Tuesday? Brandon Schaefer is in the house, everybody. Welcome, Brandon. How are you doing this morning?
Hello.
I can hear you loud and clear coming in. And I know you're in the snow also, because you're not that far away from where I am. So.
Yeah, 100%, Steve. It's great to be on here with you this morning again. And that shirt looks extra comfy and cozy. So I'm in this cold sweatshirt here. But anyway, what I'm thinking about today is just, the mindset, man. I continue to go over this, and I know I went over this one time before, but it's just that courage being greater than the fear, man. That courage, because life is going to step up. Life is going to knock us down. Life is going to just arrive, And if we're not in that proper mindset to know that, hey, listen, no matter what happens, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the condition is, that I'm going to look at this as a positive. I'm going to look at this as a learning experience. It's easy to get sucked into the tornado. It's easy to get sucked in to negativity and thinking that you're never going to come out of it, that it's never going to get better. and it just starts this vicious cycle. So for me personally, I mean, I'm going through a bunch of different stuff right now, and every morning I have to wake up and like, hey, where's my courage? Where's my fear? Where's my courage? Where's my fear? I got to focus on these courages. So my main message for today is, no matter what is going on, no matter what way you're feeling, just focus on your courage today. Bring the best out in your courage today, and it will definitely help you out. So that's all I have for you today, Steve.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, every day is a challenge in terms of that mindset. That's the, that lizard brain takes over and, wants to run us into a spiral of, like what ifs of like, oh, this could happen, that could happen. And that's not, that never helps anything, does it?
No, not at all.
All righty. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate your joining us. You're always a shot of adrenaline on Tuesday morning. We love it. We appreciate you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. I'll talk soon, man.
Okay,
bye.
Take care. All righty. So that's Brandon Schaefer. He is Simple Business Help is his business. If you have some technology where you need to connect piece A with piece B and you just can't figure it out, Brandon has a network and team of geeks who can do that kind of stuff for you and can make it all happen. So reach out to Brandon Schaefer, simplebusinesshelp.com, if you need some help with your technology. And I forgot to do his closing, so we'll do it right now. All right, Brandon, see you next week. All righty. Yes. Once again, Brandon Schaefer, simplebusinesshelp.com. Reach out to Brandon if you and your team need some help solving, getting your different technology components to talk to each other. That's what his team specializes in, simplebusinesshelp.com. All righty. Now let's go ahead and just jump right into my monologue today so that we can get to Angie LaRue coming up in just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to talk about awakening because the conversation that I had with Angie a couple of weeks ago helped me reflect differently on my own journey and my own awakening. And that's what these conversations are hopefully doing for you, the viewers, the listeners, and it's just constantly a process of our own spiritual journey, our own awakening, our own consciousness. It just keeps happening. So anyway, I'm going to define awakening first and foremost. And I'm going to say, for me, it means moving from subconscious living to conscious living. That was kind of what it meant for me. I went like back in 2009, I was at a point where I was like, okay, something's got to change here. And I had a friend, and she introduced me to some weekend programs, this organization that did personal development work. And I attended seminars throughout that course of the year. So 2009 was my year of awakening. But basically that definition again is moving from subconscious living to conscious living. And the subconscious is where we had like this programmed living. And that was from our beliefs going all the way back to our childhood, from parents, teachers, our communities, the groups we belonged into a child. And we came to believe all these things. We were taught, our subconscious mind got filled up with all this. And then these programs just continued to run and run and run. And suddenly in 2009, I became aware that, okay, I can actually take control of those programs and begin to change them. It opened up a whole can of worms in terms of beliefs, and it wasn't a simple, easy process, but it was the beginning of like, okay, I can run the show. I don't have to be, a victim, and really, it was the beginning of like where I was aligning to. I was raised in Christianity, Catholic, went to Catholic schools, and so the whole idea of God and religion was very ingrained with me. But that was where I really started shifting to the idea of source or universe, spirit. And since then, the quantum field, those are the terms that I prefer to use for my own way of thinking about it. But it's God, it's the same thing that we had, or for me, it was the same thing that I learned from when I was a child. So at that point, I remember I felt like a student and I wanted to know more. I became very curious about this whole thing. And I started, like the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And the more I did learn, like the deeper layer, I kept going with it. So it began that process. And again, that was back in 2009. And I was just really brand new living in Montana full time then. I had been a couple-year transition period. And I had this big vision that started even 5 years before I got there about what my life was going to be. And by the time I got there and I was living and executing on that vision, it all kind of fell apart and it didn't work anything like I had designed it. And so that was the kind of moment or the trigger that made me go, okay, I've got to do something differently here because what I'm doing isn't working. So I had put all my eggs in the Montana basket, and there I was, and then suddenly it wasn't working. But I was in this beautiful place, and the mountains were there, and I had this kind of calm feeling that I'm in the right place to do what I'm supposed to do. And yet I didn't quite know what that was supposed to be. And that old dream, I was still trying to hang on to that and make that work. And yet it wasn't working. And so there was this like kind of a tug of war going on between the old and the new. And so that was all happening back in my life at that time. And it was a slow process. There were lots of little aha moments where I was like, oh, I kind of go, like I'd have this new level of a consciousness and awareness about it as I learned and went through this journey process. And these moments would always say, hey, you're on the right track. You're on the right track. Keep going, keep going, keep going. So I kind of felt that way. And like I said, these old beliefs were being shed and new beliefs were being brought in. And it was kind of a slow and steady pace that I was going through. And oftentimes it was frustratingly slow. Like I wanted to go faster with it. And yet it kind of just came at its own pace. And I had to learn patience. Patience was one of the things, I guess that was one of the virtues. That was one of the things I had to learn. And, part of that journey, I did a lot of writing during that. It was really the beginning of my Speaking Gump blog. I ended up writing 500 blog posts over the next, several years. And that was like kind of a foundation for this new thinking that I was going through. It was process. It was an opportunity to process. And I came across this quote at the time by William Faulkner. It says, I never know what I think about something until I read what I've written about it. I never know what I think about something until I read what I've written about it. And that was me. That was me processing it. And so as I was writing this blog, I was like learning what I thought about it. And for me, the writing was a way of, processing and I, being, using the brain, that this body has, it was like, okay, it was a good way of processing. And yet there was like a connection to, in a higher source inspiration the whole time as I was going through it. And sometimes I'd get to the end of something I'd wrote and I'd write it, I'd edit it, I'd edit it, I'd edit it, I'd edit it. And then I'd go, oh, that's it. And then I'd read it again and I go, oh, that's what I believe about it. And so it's kind of a cool, fun process. So in 2016, I had spoke with a friend who's been a guest on the show, Tamara Fleming, and I said to her, I don't remember anything about my past lives. And I didn't even know if I believed I had past lives. And she didn't really say anything other than just, we talked a little bit about it. But that moment and that conversation really shifted my thinking about that, where I had kind of was like, no, there's no past lives. That's crazy talk. That's not what's happening. To, okay, that's probably what actually did happen. And as I mentioned, I was raised in the Catholic faith, and the Catholics believe that there is no incarnation. And somehow we're just like, poof, we appear in this life, and then we're eternal and we live forever. But, it's like, where were we before? And where did it begin with? If we didn't, how could we just poofed out of zero and then we go on to be these eternal beings. That's what they're teaching us. And yet, there was nothing before that. And so that didn't make sense. And so then I went through the process and thought about it. Again, didn't have any recollection, still don't have any real recollection of any previous lives. And I'm sharing this just because our guest has experienced that. So anyway, and this incident in 2016 was 7 years after I really began my journey. So my journey was like this sort of like awakening. It was just this slow, steady, like little piece, little piece, little piece, little piece. So when Angelia LaRue was on the program a couple of weeks ago, she said, "Oh, you're a good student." And she talked about her radical spontaneous awakening of consciousness, or the cosmic 2x4 Godsmack. Cosmic 2x4 Godsmack. That means like 2x4, whack, smack. And she, afterwards, we continued a conversation after the show ended a little bit. And it was like, she shared with me that that's not necessarily the best way to go about doing it. And that was her journey, but it allowed me to start to think about my own journey in a different way, where I had been maybe frustrated by it being slow in manifesting and in opening up. It's been like easy to process because there was no, radical spontaneous moment of awakening. It was more like this steady, drip, 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 drip. And so I just wanted to share that, before we got with Angie, who's coming up in just 30 seconds from now. But I thought it's just that continuous learning and the processing of it. And here I was thinking, my journey wasn't exciting. And yet, having spoken with Angie, whose journey has been very exciting. There's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. There's no one way that's better than the other. We all have our own experiences. And so I learned from the conversation that, to appreciate my journey just a little bit more, and to be grateful the way it's all worked out. So that's it. All righty. Let's see. Angie is in the back room waiting. Let's go ahead and bring her on and welcome her back to the American Gumption Morning Show. Hello there, Reverend Angelia LaRue. Welcome back.
Good morning, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. And I listened to our yesterday. I listened to our interview from 2 weeks ago, and I wanted to share the very first thing that happened was I ended up getting what we would call chills running up and down our spine several times during that listening to the conversation, because we kind of connected in a special way. I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I'm grateful that you're coming back today. And when we met on Christmas Day, and you were as this guest, I shared the story a little bit, but I'll just repeat the idea that I saw you, and I somehow was like attracted, and I was curious, like, who is this? I want to know who this person is. And then you came on and you joined and you did your presentation with Kathy Mason, and that's how we initially got to know each other. And so there's something among people that connect each other. And part of my journey from 2014 was this moment when I went, oh, we're all connected. There are no coincidences, but that connection is stronger with different people at different times. And so anyway, I'm re-listening to the interview, and from our initial meeting, there was some kind of a strong connection that I had. And I'm just grateful that we're going to continue our conversation today.
And it could well be, it's the divine in me connecting to the divine in you, right? Mm-hmm. We act as mirrors, and the God awakened in one person is like a beacon. It's like a light. And in our case, it's the light recognizing itself.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, we cannot play the first time guest welcoming theme because we played that last time, but I will just read your bio one more time so that people know who you are. And then we'll, what I wanted to do is we'll do a quick, like, overview of what we talked about, very brief, because people can go back and listen to that portion. It was a great interview. But and there's a little bit of the journey that I want to continue with, but then I also want to get into what you're really doing in terms of your advanced psychic healing and energy cleansings that you do. So we'll that'll be what the conversation is all about today. Does that sound okay?
Sounds beautiful.
All righty. So let me just tell people who you are. Reverend Angelia LaRue is a certified master Christologist and energy practitioner, which to her are modern words for ancient knowledge which has never been lost. On December 9th, 2011, Angie had a radical, spontaneous awakening of consciousness that changed everything in her up to that moment portion of her life. For the next 4 years, Angelia was on a discovery and learning quest. She traveled the world, read and learned from ancient texts. She discovered what the awakening of consciousness meant for her and what she was supposed to do with her newfound abilities and knowledge. Angie eventually became aligned to spirit and to her higher self. Spirit let Angie know that she had learned enough to stop traveling and practicing. She could now settle down and begin to build a service to help others. The last few years have been settled in Colorado, creating a variety of different energy healing modalities and gadgets, including a crystal biobed and orgone generator. Since that fateful day, December 9th, 2011, Angie has been living as if she didn't have a choice but to follow the path her life was taking. She includes this quote, "By the time you figure out the game, it's too late. You are already a player." So Angie LaRue, welcome back to the American Gumption Morning Show.
Thank you, Steve. It's really great to be here again. I enjoy your presence so much. You're just so full of life and enthusiasm, and what a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel the same way. And so we went through the whole story, the beginning of the story, and I don't want to repeat that. I kind of just gave a little quick summary of it. But maybe the way to begin today's conversation is, you were on this journey, on this quest, and yet it was not necessarily what you wanted or asked for. You were like in the game, fully, and yet it was it was a challenge for you at that time. It wasn't like it was just this fun, like, all right, a spontaneous awakening of consciousness. It was more like that cosmic 2x4 Godsmack that you said. So tell us, what was your life like during that time? I'm sure there were highs and lows, but just give us a sense of what you were going through.
There was a tremendous amount of chaos. Essentially, Humpty Dumpty had fallen off the wall and had broken into 1,000 pieces. It could never be put back together the same way. And I was even beginning to question if the same way was appropriate. And there was also these incredible moments of bliss where I was connected with the universe, the whole substructure of everything, and discovering that the animating influence that runs through the universe is love and joy without cause. And so the moments were extreme, so very extreme, the spectrum so wide of the different emotions. And it was hard to, kind of transverse that, because that changed every few hours a day.
In my monologue, I discussed that my journey was like lots of highs and lows, but not the extreme highs and lows that you were going through. And I remember you shared that after we talked, that it wasn't something that you necessarily wanted and that you recommend for it, and the idea that you probably had hints along the way, and yet you kind of refused to listen to those hints. And so the cosmic 2x4 Godsmack was kind of like a, like spirit forcing itself upon you.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because we are eternal spirits and we've had many different bodies. This is like a costume. I'm playing Angie now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't realized that previously. And so, our eternal self that has all these different persona costumes, had things it wanted to do this life. It had evolutions it wanted to learn. It had experiences it wanted to have. And eventually it just kind of took over the vessel, right? And I had no way to know there was another aspect of myself that had that kind of power. And I remember, and that power can be very strong. And I remember one time I had this question on my mind about a way that I needed to respond to a particular person that had done harm to me. And I was a passenger in a vehicle, and all of a sudden my head got turned like this, and it was held looking out the passenger window for about 45 minutes. And I was getting this terrible crick in my neck, and it didn't matter what I did. I couldn't turn my head back to look out, the windshield. It was stuck looking out this way. And finally, this barn came by, and I am not kidding you. This really happened. There's really a barn out there somewhere that's purple. And in bright yellow letters, it says compassion running down the entire length of the barn. And as soon, and I'd had that question in my mind. And as soon as I saw the sign that said compassion, I had the answer. And when that happened, I was able to turn my head back again and look out the front windshield. And for 2 days, I had like a crick in my neck. It was so sore from being held there for 45 minutes. So spirit has power, a lot of power, right? And those moments like that, when it really is driven home to you, makes you want to be a part of that team, right?
Yeah. What do you say to people who hear this and go, oh, well, that's just a coincidence. That's just, it just happened. And where I'm going with this is in your, when you talk about the work that you do, you said that it works best for those who believe in spirit and source and believe that it's possible. And so I certainly, do. And I've directed my life to that. And yet we're a little bit hesitant to want to go out in public and talk about these things because people think it's, it's sort of somehow maybe it's that older belief from what we were trained to believe that, this is just kookiness or craziness. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what the question is other than it's a challenge for us.
Sure, or not. Basically from what we understand, 1 in 10 people is awakening or in the process of awakening or awakened or even enlightened at any given time in history, right?
Okay,
so 90% of the people are not awakened, but 10% are. That means out of every 10 people I meet, 1 of those people is going to understand what I say, and they're not going to go into questioning, right? They're in touch enough with their own spirit that they intuit, like you said, right? You get these chills, you get these chills of affirmation, when you're hearing the truth. When we hear the absolute truth, there's a charge we get in our body. And it's, I don't know, and to me, it's like spirit applauding from the inside out, right? And so if people don't believe me, that's fine. I'm not here to prove anything to anybody. I'm here to live a spirit-charged, spirit-filled life of love. And what other people think is just not even actually my business. They're in their own walk and everything is where it should be for them, right?
Yeah, one of my guests a few weeks ago said, used the term, it's spiritually inappropriate to worry about what someone else thinks. And that, I just love that term, spiritually inappropriate.
I love that.
And so I thought that was pretty cool. And I was thinking also as I prepared for today's show, I was thinking when I would sit on the bench as Forrest Gump and talk to people, and I was being this character, and it was a performance type of role, there would be occasional people that somehow I would just like look at, and something magical happened, and it was hard to describe, but there was a knowing that I had, and that other person had. And even to this day, I think about a few of these encounters, and you get those chills, or you get that energy rush. And it didn't happen. You're saying 10%, and okay, that seems like a pretty good number. It didn't happen often, but when it did happen, you knew it. It was very special.
Yeah. Moments of magic.
Yeah.
And I often wonder what that is. Is that soul recognition? Right? Did we know them in another life? Did we have a close relationship with them in another life? Or is it a kindred spirit that charges a part of ourselves, right? Like a battery getting recharged again. They fill us and we fill them. Affirmation of spirit seen in the other. And I don't know.
There was one, I'm going to share one story. There was a young girl. She couldn't have been, a young teenager, and she was standing off at a distance, and she was watching, and she was like maybe eating an ice cream cone or something. And somehow we saw each other and we connected, and, she was shy, and I waved her over, and she came over. And when I first saw her, like I saw this wise person. And when she got there and came close, she was just such a young, like a child. And nothing really was said, but it was just kind of this very magical moment. So there was that person who was that soul spirit that there was a connection with. And anyway, it's it's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it.
You do.
Yeah. So very good. Well, there's a little bit more of your original story that I would like to just kind of get into, and it's kind of it's part of your dark part. So I didn't want to rush into it, but I think it's worth going. At the very end of your journey of that 4 or 5 year period where you were going around and learning and teaching, you ended up in the southwest part, Utah, the deserts. And what happened in that period, I think, and that might be just the right way to kind of close that whole chapter, and then we can get into really what you're doing today, because that's where the juice is and what's happening. But would you be willing to just share a little bit about that portion of your life? Because I just have a curiosity of what that was really like, and because it was kind of like the final breaking point and how you burst through. So share with us a little bit about that, please.
So that was kind of the 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. And I had manifested a vehicle, and I didn't know where to go. And I was just listening to the voice of spirit, or the sensation of spirit. And I could feel it all through my body. And I could feel when I was supposed to turn or take a different road or go into this national park or that national park. And a lot of that was, there was these like dusty desert rock shops with fossils and dinosaur bones and all kinds of stones, which I had no interest in. I just wasn't interested. But every time I would pass one, I would get this crawling sensation in my skin, like I needed to go back. And there would be this urge that I had just passed something important and I needed to go back. And the sensation, the further I got away from the rock shop, the stronger it would get, until I was just crawling out of my skin. And as soon as I would slow down to turn around, the sensation would let up. And the closer I would get back to the rock shop, the more the sense of excitement would build in my belly and rise up. And I mean, I was being herded. Just definitely being herded through energy and sensation and senses. And so I'd get led into these rock shops and shown how rocks produced energy, and those energies were different frequencies. And then I didn't get to leave the rock shop until I had bought rocks. And pretty soon I'm hauling a box of rocks around the desert going, I've lost my mind. What am I doing? And at that time, gas was close to $5 a gallon. And so now I'm adding all this weight into my vehicle too. And I was just moaning and groaning and so upset that I didn't seem to be in control of my life. And eventually I ended up on the north rim of the Grand Canyon with a box of rocks. And this is when there was basically a tug of war happening inside of me between the egoic mind, or the conscious mind, and consciousness itself, right? So it was this battle inside of me. And, you know, the ego didn't want to give up at all. It had been in charge of the life all this time, and it didn't want to be usurped, and it thought it would die. It was fighting for its very life rather than share control or give up control. And so there was many nights and many days in a fetal position wailing, right? The death of the ego, well, it's not really truly the death, it just feels like it, was long and hard. And eventually the final moment of that showdown was in the vehicle. North rim of the Grand Canyon was about 70 feet away, and I had one foot on the gas and one on the brakes, and the engine was revved. And it was in that moment when the ego would rather kill the entire vessel and end everything rather than share the helm, that it was proved to the ego that it was fundamentally insane, right? Or maybe not insane, but biologically wired in a way which wasn't helpful at all. It was biologically designed to survive no matter what. Except in this case, when it believed that it couldn't survive, it was wanting to choose the exit. And it was in that moment that the ego itself realized that it couldn't carry on as the single boss any longer. That there was things that happened in life that it couldn't begin to comprehend. No matter how intelligent the brain was, it couldn't comprehend these things. And it was in that moment that surrender actually happened. I put the vehicle into park, let my foot off the gas and off the brake, turned the vehicle off. And that was the surrender to spirit. That was when the ego agreed to share the sandbox. And it's been a teamwork since then, you know.
Thank you for sharing it in a way that puts a positive spin on it, because I love the idea that the ego wasn't like crushed and sent away in not be part of it, but the ego is going to share the stage. And do you today have does the ego come roaring back, battling back, trying to regain control on a regular basis? Or
yeah. It definitely is a dragon inside, and it always wants to usurp control. And really the only way to control it is to keep the observer state going. So meditation becomes critically important, the silencing of the mind. The longer that goes without meditation, the more the egoic structure takes over. And ultimately, it's just not the winning combination. It just really doesn't have the tool sets that are needed to live the best life, right? And to really be truly on the path, spirit-inspired, source creator living through you. The ego, it just can't help it. It tries to shut that down. It tries to be the boss of everything. And so, meditating and keeping that observer state going. And even when the ego is in full flare, if the observer state or the witness state has been developed, it can watch what's happening and watch what's going on and send information to the ego. And the ego can go, oh, we don't want to do that, right? And it can back down. It can make the choice to back down.
if the, science seems to want to say that there's like 5% is like conscious living, and 95% is in this subconscious living. Do you have an opinion about is the ego really part of that subconscious, or is it part of the conscious? And then as we awaken and we begin to raise our consciousness level, does those percentages change, or do we reprogram the subconscious mind to be more in alignment with what what the conscious mind wants to? So does that 95% kind of still hold, or are we somehow consciously living more often? And again, I'm not sure if you understand the question, but take a stab at it.
How I describe it for the students in the Inner Passage Mystery School is, we're like a computer, an antenna system for that matter. And the brain, the conscious mind or the egoic structure, is the operating system. And the difference in awakening and not awakening is when we're not awakened, society is stuffing our computer full of programs, all kinds of apps and programs. And there's no choice. There's just unconscious absorbing of all these different programs, right? But when the computer or when the operating system begins to understand what it is, it starts getting rid of all the apps. That's the awakening of consciousness. It starts getting rid of all those apps and all those programs, and it looks for ways to streamline its functioning, right? So that's how I see the brain. It's the operating system for the third dimension. Ego is earth guidance only. But with the awakening of consciousness, we have access to more dimensions than just the third dimension. The brain can't get to any of those dimensions at all. It is just for this dimension. So it's the one that drives the car and pays the taxes and makes, choices on what to wear and what to eat and et cetera, et cetera. It's needed. The brain is needed. We've got to have it. And I remember when I have very single mind focus. And so when I put my mind on something, I'm tenacious. And my mind had been put on getting rid of the ego, right? Stilling it once and for all and being able to stay in those states of high-flying bliss. And actually managed to pull it off for about, I don't remember, almost a week, probably, where the ego, when it wouldn't even think, it would ask to think first. It was fascinating. But what happened is there was nothing there to make a choice. And so I would wake up in the morning and certain instincts would take over, like, I have to go to the restroom. And I would go to the restroom, I'd get done going to the restroom. And I would be standing, I was in a little spiritual hermitage in a little tiny one-person cabin. And I would be standing there going, it's daytime. What do I do now? And I would be looking around with no comprehension of what humans did in the daytime. And at some point I would look down and I would realize I was naked. And I'd go, clothes. I'll put clothes on. And then I would be standing in front of my clothes and I couldn't choose. There was nothing in me to make a choice. It's the ego that makes choices, right? Mm-hmm. Eventually I'd manage to get dressed and then I didn't know what do you do next? I had no idea. And then I would notice a pain in my stomach. And I would contemplate the pain, and at some point, the ego would go, you're hungry. Oh, I should eat. And this went on for a week. It was extremely ineffective not having an ego to make choices, right? So that's the big, huge thing that the ego does, is it chooses between this, that, and the other thing. And without that, we're not accomplishing anything, right? We might be blissed out and in a state of extreme connectedness with everything, right? Communion with the trees and the deer and, the javelina pigs and all the birds. But there's nothing making a choice. So we're just kind of like a mushroom absorbing everything around us and getting dusty. So the brain is actually very important. It's a huge part of having a human experience. The difference with the awakened mind is we realize the brain, the ego, the Angie, the Steve, is only part of the experience.
I'm a big fan of law of attraction and follower of Abraham and a student. And what I believe what Abraham would call contrast is really what the ego is there to do, and that is that human experience that we're talking about. So without the ego, the human experience, as you're describing, would become very, there would be no human experience. It would just sort of, fade away or something. And, there'd be kind of an enlightenment. So somehow then the question becomes, how do we let them coexist with each other and co-create this experience of a joyful heaven on earth life experience, human experience, while being connected with that, that higher source knowing. And that seems to be the ultimate, way of, optimizing this experience, this life force experience.
It's kind of hard to put that in words. But I think once the conscious mind realizes that it's a very important part of the experience, and it's loved and it's appreciated, and it's part of the co-creation of the eternal soul, a peace and an understanding comes. And not only that, but it desires for this life to be highly useful in the evolution of the soul. Mm-hmm. The soul seems to evolve fairly slowly. And it needs many, 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 many lives. Well, an eternity of lives, really. And so, part of how the ego can be very useful now, instead of being a hindrance, is by listening to the spirit and being directed and guided by the spirit and adding experiences to the totality of the soul. It's just really becomes a co-creation. And the ego becomes its new purpose, is to listen to spirit.
In my journey of these last 10 years, the idea of co-creating only really, I became familiar with the term, but I had no understanding of really what that meant for a long time. And it's only in the last few years that I suddenly am kind of getting the idea of co-creating. Would you be willing to just share your thinking on co-creating, what that means for someone who's maybe in a, kind of a curious stage of like, gee, is this the path I want to go down?
Well, I think we've all had these moments, especially if a person is creative, writing music or poetry or doing art or, anything that requires a certain, it could even be, coming up with new programming, a new code. But there's this moment where we slip into like a flow state and things just come through us. We don't have to think about them and agonize them. The answer's just there. The path is just there. And if we can stay in that state, life seems to just flow through us. That's a co-creation state. That's where the universe or source or God is literally flowing through us. The more time that we can spend in that state, that empty state where life can flow through us, the more time we're in co-creation. So co-creation is kind of a beingness, not a doingness. Or the doingness happens, but there's no noticing of the doing. There's no efforting involved.
Yeah. As I have evolved in doing this show, I just passed the 6-month mark of the show, and I've settled into a bit of a routine where my monologues are really a co-creative process. And I don't, sometimes, maybe every once in a while, I get kind of an inspiration in advance, but most of the time I just reflect on who I'm going to speak with that day. There's preparation that's done in advance for that, but the actual monologue part is like, what am I going to speak to this person about, and what is it that I want to share? And it's not necessarily to most of the time, it's kind of like a processing of myself, that, back to that William Faulkner quote that I said, like, I have to read what I wrote to understand what I think about something. And the monologue has taken on that type of a thing for me. So that's very much a co-creative process. And I'm grateful for it. And it is a flow. It just sort of happens. I've learned to just trust it, and it's been fun. So.
Yeah.
Well, let's. We're going to, you and I have these conversations that just sort of ramble around, but let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit and talk about what you're doing in Colorado these days, in Boulder, the two things that you're really doing are the. Let's see, where are my notes here? Oh, the advanced psychic healings and energy cleansing. That's one piece of it, but that's like to me, that I don't want to say that that's the most important piece that you're doing, but it seems like that's a good place to start. And then of course the orgone generator crystal biobed. Just talk a little bit about them. We're not going to have time to go into too much detail with it, but at least let's tease it, and then we'll get into that more in the future.
So remember when I was led into all those dusty rock shops?
Yeah.
Part of that was remembering my history in Lemuria and later in Atlantis, when I had deeply studied the nature of crystals and minerals and their effects on the healing body, the evolution of consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was downloaded a lot of information on how to work with them. And I'll show you the orgone generator crystal bed. It's right here behind me. I'll just open that up really quick.
Okay. Yep. And I can, she's opening up the bed. There it is. I believe there's some lighting. I guess that's a lighting that is causing the brightness of it. But you'll have to say that for sure. The crystals are in there. Among that, there's some kind of electrical wiring, I guess, that's hooking up with it. But the person just essentially lays on top of it, and this energy is, like filled into the body.
Right. So that's the basis of it. And it's just some LED lights that are causing the lighting, and they're just on the selenite to give it essentially some photons. So it's just a little bit of charging for them.
Okay.
There is a lot of wires. The wires are not moving electricity, though. They're moving the energy from the crystals. Crystals produce two types of energy, piezo and piezo energy. And the nature of crystals is to clean up energy, right? So they'll take broad spectrum energy and they'll clean that up, and they'll narrow it down into something very clean and pure. And then depending what stones you put with them will then depend what the output of the total energy is or what it does. And so the stones in the bed, besides the crystals, I don't even know how many crystals there is. There's a main crystal and core with several branches off of it representing the arms and the legs. And then around it are different types of minerals that are amplifying areas in our bodies. So, near the feet and legs are carnelian and red calcite, which have to do with bone marrow, muscle, tissue, blood, etc. Around the trunk area of the body are a lot of orange type crystals like citrine and orange calcite, which have to do with digestion, the internal functioning of the kidneys, the gallbladder, the appendix, the liver. And that continues up until, you're getting into the brain stem and around the head and all of that. So they're all designed to help function the the body at an optimum level. And then around that, on the top of the orgone generator crystal biobed, I build crystal circuits, and different circuits create different effects in the mind, the body, or the spirit, in some cases, all three. So these are much like a circuit board. And depending how you organize the circuit board is going to depend on the effects that you get for the person. And then, this is the main power source. This really powers it. So this is revitalizing all the cells of the body, every aspect of the body and every part of the body. And so, laying on it for 15, 20, 30 minutes is an extraordinary experience. It just fills you up with life force energy. It expands your auric field by several feet. Yeah. So that's, and then, so this is a large orgone generator, but I also make smaller orgone generators. So these are examples of smaller ones.
Okay.
This will do a whole room, this one here. This can recharge the energy in a whole room, and it'll pull out a lot of the electronic signals, anything that's built lower than it in frequency. It will adjust those frequencies and take them up higher. And that helps keep us charged with energy. It helps evolve our consciousness. It makes life a lot smoother and easier. That's one of the most amazing things that I've really learned with these. And these are spirit inspired, and a lot of people's spirits have actually inspired them or helped them remember how this was all done and apply it. But it makes life easier. It kind of smooths the path. It helps us stay on a more even emotional keel so that we're not expending all of our energy. And our energy is like fuel in the vehicle. We only have so much per day. And the less we use that on emotional ups and downs and twisting and turning on our own vine, the more we have for productivity. So it really increases productivity a lot.
In my journey, I've come to realize the what people call the chakras or energy centers of the body. And I didn't, this is again only the last few years that, here I am 10 years into my journey, and these things I heard early on, but I just didn't have any interest or ability to, understand them. And so it's only the last few years, this idea of the energy centers and the three lower energy centers below the heart, where the body really stores energy. And, that's what ends up causing disease and, problems with it when there's just too much energy being stored in the body. And so I'm guessing that your this bed or these smaller orgone generators help to release that energy from the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and help it flow better. So if you think about, a circuit board where energy isn't flowing well through a component, you'll get a hot spot and an eventual burnout, and that circuit board will fry out. And our bodies are essentially the same way. So we want to keep all that energy flowing nice and smooth through the system. And where we get an energy block, right? Perhaps heavy metals in the kidneys, where we get an energy block, the energy can't get past that point. And this is where we start seeing disease developing in the body.
Yeah, so we can end up storing energy a variety of different ways to where it happens. You talked about heavy metals. Well, if someone is exposed to those on a repeated basis, they're going to accumulate in the body. That would be kind of a physical overload. But then there's also what we would call like a mental overload, where the brain doesn't have a chance to calm and relax and send that relaxation throughout the body, and it just runs at that hyper kind of level all the time, and then that energy just sort of gets blocked up that way. Can you help in both those situations, like either heavy metal blockage or just energy that's stored up from?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So for that, I would go into a different healing modality.
Okay.
Right. So then I'm going in as a healer. I'm identifying where those energy blocks are, which I can feel in my hands, or I can see psychically. Although usually I will do both. One will, verify the information of the other. And then it's possible to go in and pull that out, right? Now, nature hates a void. So whenever you pull out an energy form, you need to backfill that space in very quickly with an energy that you're choosing. And that's where the crystal biobed, or I'll directly send energy. A lot of my clientele are through Zoom, right? And I can send that, and we could play with that. I could send you energy like right now, and you go, whoa, I feel that, right? So it's, it's selecting what we want in there versus what we don't want in there. And one of the things that a lot of people need is self-love. They weren't given good examples of that when they were children, right? And a lot of our disease actually comes from dis-ease in the emotions around loving and receiving, giving and receiving love. And so that's usually a really good thing to backfill when you remove out energy. If you'll fill it back in again with love and self-love, it helps the organs themselves to repair and be at ease, right? So that emotional life that we have and the thoughts and the stories that we tell ourselves and that keep looping eventually start causing problems in the body. So like kidney stones tend to be associated with short bursts of anger, right? Our gallbladder, our liver, and our kidneys, and our appendix are processing units of the body, right? And so when we can't detox our thoughts, we can't eliminate we can't figure out how to process through some of these heavy emotions, that shows up in our organs of elimination, right? Diabetes is, it has to do with the pancreas, sweetness, the sweetness of life, right? And when we can't find those beautiful, precious little moments where we're just overwhelmed and awed by something, and do that fairly regularly, we're not finding the sweetness in life, this develops an intolerance in our system, and we end up with problems associated with that. So it really is looking like that something showing up in the body is the final red flag waving in the wind of a problem with how we're perceiving our life, right? And so a lot of what I do is remove those resistances and give the correct patterns back. And what happens with that is people are it's easier for them to see the looping thoughts that they have and go, oh, I'm going to change that thought. And as they change that thought, the body begins to respond in a different way, right? And they begin to reverse their disease, which is leading ultimately to disease.
We did shift into this in terms of what you're doing, and this is a big topic, and this is really where the next conversation needs to go deeper in this. I have many questions. The last thing I will before we wrap up today's interview is, do you believe, is it possible for the body to heal itself after it has been stressed and diseased over a many year period? And is that the type of work that you do with people? I know the answer, of course, is that yes is the answer, but I'm asking it so that someone who's watching or listening, if they've tried other types of healing and it hasn't worked, how can you help people who have something that other traditional Western medicine doctors go, oh, there's nothing we can do at this point for you, or that or before we even get to that question. So can the body rejuvenate itself after it's been harmed? Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. And if the situation has been removed that was causing the harm, it's much easier to heal the body. Now, if the person's going back into the same situation again, now we're looking at, we're just going to have to keep doing healing on it, and it's it can get ridiculous. Really great little story. I was working with a nurse, and this is just last week, and she had these little like abscesses all over inside of her lungs. It was very, very bad, and Western medicine wasn't able to help her. Well, she had spent 20 years in a hospital with asbestos, very bad. It was a very old hospital, and a tremendous amount of formaldehyde. And this has caused these horrible sores and these like little tiny glass needle things in her lungs. And, Western medicine really didn't have no idea what to do with that, right? She came to me. I developed a motif to get rid of all the glass needles and heal all these little tiny sores inside of the lungs. And she had all the MRIs and all the tests done, and they knew exactly what was going on with her lungs. So I did my work on her. And the next week, she went back to her doctor and had all the tests run again. And with the exception of like one little spot in her lungs, they had healed. They had completely healed. And the doctor was stunned and amazed. He'd never seen anything like that before. And she said, what do you think could cause such a spontaneous healing inside of, a 2-week period? And he said, I don't know. It's a miracle. Just take it. Just accept it. Right. And she didn't tell him that she had gone to a healer, but she definitely had a big internal grin. It was a beautiful thing for her to see the verification of the ease in breathing that she was having right there, on the x-rays, on the MRI. It just inside of 2 weeks, it was gone and healed. So, but she's retired. She's not going back to the hospital with exposure to that formaldehyde and the asbestos, right? So once she was removed out of that situation, it was easy to heal it and not have it return. It's the returning part that's difficult, right? If a person hasn't solved the situation that caused the damage in the first place, and they're just going back into it or going back into those thought patterns again, healing is temporary at best.
Yeah.
And that's for Western medicine as well.
Right. I'm thinking about surgeries where pieces are cut out and removed. The bad pieces are cut out and removed. Well, but the source of what generated all those has never been addressed. And so, it's continuing that way. Here's the two things I definitely want to do. I want to come and I want to lie on that bed at some point. So that is, I'm putting that on my bucket list of things to do. And then I would love to, we'll find a time that we could maybe continue this conversation again and go deeper into this whole idea, because this is really the work that you're doing today. I so appreciate that you were willing to, already join us twice and talk about like kind of how you got here, but now at this point, it's like, this is the exciting part. This is the part that's fun for you. And some of that, we went through the details of it. It was a difficult journey. And, I didn't realize that your foot was on the gas and the brake at the same point, 70 feet away from the north rim of the Grand Canyon. And, that was the dark night of the soul moment that you talked about in your writing. So thank you for sharing that. Final thoughts before we say goodbye today?
I'm getting something about expanding love. Finding more and more ways to love everything that you do, everything that you are, and everything you're a part of. Ultimately, love brings peace. And so for your listening audience, the state of gratitude and appreciation and love for everything is what's really coming through in this moment. Find ways to love.
Love is the answer. Well, thank you, Angelia LaRue. I sure do appreciate you. And I hope that we'll be able to, meet again and continue this journey, because it's there's just so much to it. And I think it's great that you've been willing to share it. And I just love what you're doing. And I look forward to, continuing the conversation. So thank you for joining us.
I look forward to it too, Steve.
Thank you. All righty. Well, we went a little bit long there. We're what are we, about 10 minutes past the hour? So that's okay. I didn't want to just stop it. I did want to get into that a little bit, but boy, you can see that there's so many other modalities. She said, well, Angie said, I would handle this situation. She has 5 or 6 different big toolboxes that she uses to work with clients and to help in the healing. And we just touched on really one of those, the orgone generator. So anyway, we'll continue that conversation, hopefully. Alrighty. Well, tomorrow, Nikki Roscoe joins us, and Nikki did her own crystal work and talking, but she's going to talk about her TV days plus her brand new course, Love Yourself, Manifest Happiness, Abundance, and Romance in Your Life. And so she'll join us tomorrow. And then on Thursday, Malika Paranosik, a composer, performance artist, Juilliard School graduate and current member of the faculty, and we'll talk about the work she's doing on Thursday. So that's it, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining us. I will see everybody tomorrow.